Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So finally we are getting to the point where we will be discussing the top 10 champions in the game overall in my opinion. So we have went through a ton of these ranking videos and we are left with basically the 10 strongest champions in the game overall. And then as a bonus extra, we're going to be taking a look at specific BG attackers, defenders, dual purpose champions, top 10 7-star champions, and also we will be getting a tier list update. Now, here is a copy of the old list and a swift reminder that all of these videos are a mixture of my own personal views mixed together with current game relevance and trends, and that is important to understand that number one, I do not work for Kabam. I do not have access to hardcore data, which are like actually the most popular champions and stuff like that. I can only go as far as to gauge general community sentiment and obviously my own personal experience across the different game modes. On top of it, keep in mind that we are all different. We do play this game differently with different mastery setups, with different preferences, with a focus on different game modes at different levels. So what works for me might not necessarily work out for you, and it does not make your own, personal opinions any less right when it comes to yourself and your account. Neither does that make my own personal valuations wrong just because you disagree with them personally. All that being said, keep it light, keep it cheerful. Remember that I'm not trying to insult your family's honor, your ancestry, or any of such things. And before we go into the meat and bones of the video, remember that there is still an active $300 giveaway on the channel. Only thing to enter that you have to do is just have a duel in game versus me, my account, and submit that screenshot in the link that is provided in the video description below. You have until July 2nd to enter. Results will be posted on July 4th, and 3 of you will win $100 just for having a single duel with me. Right, so here we can see that the top champions on the previous list were Tigra, AA, CGR, Ghost, Nimrod, Dr. Doom, Human Torch, Kingpin, Kitty Pryde, and Hercules, and well, vast majority of them have pretty much retained their spots as well. There are a couple of updates, but this is kind of quite important to note that I do not think we will have major shifts to the top champions in the game much ever again. I mean, I'm sure that there will be specific champions that make it to the top 10 and few champions that make it out. But in general, one of the biggest things that I noticed this time around making all of the class top ranking videos and everything else is that we are getting large amount of very, very good champions, but absolutely no busted champions. And you can look at it as a good thing or you can look at it as a bad thing, but I kind of think with the balancing program, the era of absolutely OP champions is going to be pretty much over, or it's going to be a very rare instance when something that's completely broken will manage to squeeze through. And yeah, you can look at it as a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't think that tops of these strongest champion lists in the game will be varying too wildly. That said, let's get into it and start with spot number 10. And spot number 10, I am going to give to, well, an immortal Archangel. Archangel just does things, and he is, I think, in my opinion, one of the staples of my offensive champions. He is one of the more iconic MCOC champions as well, which is remarkable for the fact that he came out at February of 2017. So this champion is over 6 years old at this point. And he only has been neutered a bit. He has never gotten a buff or a rework. The only major change that he received, which I am still a bit salty about, is the fact that when his neurotoxins expire, they're not passive stuns anymore because Kabam gave some sort of bullshit excuse to change that like a year after he was in the game or 2 years. And that excuse just did not hold any ground or water. But nonetheless, they did take away his passive stuns. With passive stuns, he would be even more OP without a doubt. But as is, we all know the rules. If it bleeds and can be poisoned, then Archangel is going to be an absolutely critical nuke champion. We all experience the power of Archangel extremely frequently in Battlegrounds, where he is one of the most banned champions in the game. Alliance War defenses do need to take this guy in consideration. He does affect how defenses are placed. Not to mention the fact that we do frequently use him also in all sorts of questing situations because of the sheer amount of brutal damage that he's able to output. Now, over the course of last couple of years, it's also very fun to kind of like jazz up and max out your Archangel with Horseman of Apocalypse pre-fight and give him White Magneto to see what he's truly capable of, but he absolutely does not need any of those things. The only real perceived weakness that and annoyance that we do have with Archangel at large is that there are those bad RNG days. And given the fact that we do use Archangel in all of the more important and competitive game modes, it is extremely, extremely rare, but you can get an absolutely horrific RNG with Archangel, and that is kind of like one of those more annoying things. He's not super stable or concrete as champion, but he is powerful enough where even with a bad RNG, he often is one of the best answers to whatever he's tackling. So obviously his power comes from the fact that he places neurotoxins, which completely heal block the opponent if Archangel's awakened, which, I highly recommend you give him your awakening gems. Then he starts reducing opponent's ability accuracy with very potent percentages to a point where at the higher SIG levels, basically 3 neurotoxins completely shut down all abilities, and it's not just offensive or defensive abilities, which is a major, major thing, because most of the effects in the game will either work on defensive abilities primarily, sometimes on offensive abilities primarily. What Archangel does, he switches up everything. Offensive, defensive, doesn't matter, nodes, and everything else. And he is still to this date, I would argue, the best ability accuracy reduction type champion, which is precisely the reason why he works in so many different, environments, game modes, node combinations, matchups, and so forth. And obviously, that would not mean too much if his damage wouldn't be up to par, but it is. His damage can be absolutely ridiculous with poisons, with bleeds, everything else. His hit damage doesn't really matter. His special attack damage doesn't really matter, which is quite unique for a for a mutant champion. But such an old champion, but such a gold. Also, one of the newer updates to Archangel is the fact that he can't even have neutralize placed on him due to the fact that his ability accuracy cannot be reduced. Also make him a convenient option against some of the newer champions or newer nodes. So, spot number 10, I'm giving to Archangel, and spot number 9, we are gonna go to something that's pretty much complete opposite from Archangel, because we're going to Hulkling, and Hulkling is an opposite of Archangel in the sense that, well, he's first and foremost a very, very new champion. It has not even yet been a year since Hulkling has been introduced in the game, but he has already left a major, major mark to the game, and he does that just by running through content with brute force. And one of the biggest allures of Hulkling is the fact that he's very simple to play. Basically, just drop your level 2s, ideally whilst you are unblockable for that extra massive fury damage. And it is a simple concept packed with a ton of utility that it seems to work in the right situations for the right reasons. So he's basically immune to all forms of power control, just like Galen. So that obviously is a huge, huge plus. Also, one of the most kind of like significant things about Hulkling is his access to Pierce buffs, and there aren't too many champions in a game still that do access Pierce easily, and there are more abilities and nodes where block penetration is important or Pierce buffs in themselves. So that's kind of like one of the new MCOC 2023 things, 2022 things, I would say. Obviously, then on top of it all, he has the immunities to poisons and shocks, but really, the power there comes from is just smacking things down. His immunity is super easy to play, and he works everywhere. The point where Hulkling is one of the more, or the most, one of the most desired 2022 champions for sure. And yeah, we see him in Alliance War offensively, defensively. We see him in Battlegrounds as a dual purpose champion, one of the most effective dual purpose champions, by the way. I think a while back, Vega organized a tournament and somebody did an incredible stats, and basically Hulkling came out as, I think, as one of the top champions with the best scores both on offense and defense, because he can be incredibly tough to deal with unless you have a correct counter due to his regen, due to his high block penetration and increased combat power rate. Sorry, not increased combat power rate, but the way he gains power by activating his shifting charges. And then obviously offensively, he just runs through things. And same thing goes for Hulkling. Offensively, he does have that typical stereotypical reliance and ability to generate a ton of buffs and a ton of damage. So when it comes to Hulkling, it's relatively tricky to even explain exactly why he works as well as he does, but he does. And every single game mode, this man is putting in work, and that is to be respected. Right, moving on after Hulkling, we have to turn to, well, Tiger. Tiger is again one of those champions, in my opinion, has made the game better by sheer existence. One of those champions that does, teach players new skills or how each individual matchup is different by knowing what you can, what you can't punish, how to, do spacing on the map better. And if you don't know how to play Tigra, you would be doing yourself a massive favor by learning her. Not only you will have control of an extremely, extremely powerful attacker, but the knowledge and skills that you learned by practicing with Tigra will be useful in virtually all of the other fights as well. So what makes Tigra so great? Well, number one, she is arguably the fastest Mystic Nuke and one of the fastest offensive champions in a game for short to medium fights. The time she can get to level 2 is extremely quick due to one of her senses. Basically, whenever you inflict Rapture on an opponent, you gain power. Obviously, she's a Mystic champion as well. That can be occasionally helpful. And as soon as you get your level 2, when you do have some Raptures, things just melt with your detonations and bursts of damage and damage over time. But if you really break it down and take away her really complex playstyle, she is a very simple character. Basically, shut down opponent's buffs with your neutralize, and you can have very close to 100% uptime with Tigra in most of the matchups. And then you have access to bursts of damage, damage over time effects, and obviously multi-hit special attacks. All of those different sources of damage make Tigra really viable in many different situations when a lot of champions that have like a single source of damage wouldn't necessarily be as powerful. Like she doesn't just rely on hit damage, even though the hit damage is somewhat decent. She does have the significant burst of damage from her multi-hit special attacks, then the damage over time effect that also obviously synergizes with Inequity and Despair, helping you reduce opponents' attack and their healing abilities. Do they have any? Take away all of their buffs, and then her unique playstyle also often comes quite in handy, but really pretty much all stems from just being there first and fastest half the time. Definitely a champion that does, again, require quite a lot of skill, quite a lot of practice, quite a lot of experience, but it is absolutely worth it. One of the most capable offensive champions in the game for sure, and especially in hands of a skilled player. And there is very little not to like about Tiger, to be honest. Right, now let's slowly but surely move even higher, and this is a champion where I think we need to have yet another discussion. And Scorpion is about the perfect science champion that you can make. Scorpion is about as good of a science champion that you can make without breaking the game. The way I look at Scorpion and Human Torch debate is similar to the way I view kind of Ronaldo against Messi debate. Scorpion is the Ronaldo. He's like basically genetically engineered, ideal science champion that does whatever he does pretty much perfect. He does what other science champions do, just better or more, and that is really admirable. He obviously has access to 3 different immunities, access to 3 different damage or time effects. He has very high block proficiency, access to taunt and inequity that, mitigates any damage he takes. Petrify gives him access to healing, especially in alliance wars and battleground situations. And access to bursts of damage, again, is a very useful way to bypass a lot of damage mitigation nodes or abilities. And yeah, Scorpion is just about as good of a science champion I think we will ever see made in the game. Again, I don't think we will see anything better than Scorpion, maybe something as good as Scorpion released in science class. Because there is a lot, and it all works, and it all works really well. I think one of the bigger kind of like initial misdirects with Scorpion really was the whole torment mechanic led a lot of people astray how Scorpion should really be properly played in most of the cases where you have just no need to take that risk or be charging your heavy attacks most of the time. There are times when it's helpful, yeah, but I think at the start everybody's like super focused on it without realizing you probably just want to do your medium or medium light medium combos, dropping your level 1s or level 2s, and he has more than enough damage to be really, really fast and effective with a ton of utility. And then obviously you can synergize him up with Venom or Agent Venom, and then he turns into an absolute damage monster. Again, he is about as good of a science champion as you can put together, and that is why he is in spot number 7 and overall is the second best science champion. If you do want to know the second half of this debate, then you will have to wait until I rank Torch, because that is where I will settle that argument, hopefully once and for all. But moving on to spot number 6. And in spot number 6, it's Nimrod. And as if you guys have probably noticed by now, I am not going to be stretching out this video, hopefully as long as the previous parts, because again, these champions are staying up top forever, just like Nimrod basically, and I have said pretty much everything I need to say about them, and most of you know it. But again, just to quickly go over Nimrod. Nimrod is a champion that pretty much single-handedly put an end to any viable mutants on defense. That is it. Kabam made Nimrod, and probably some months later realized, shit, what have we done? Because of this champion, primarily, and I'm not saying that there aren't a bunch of other good tech champions that destroy most or all mutants. What I'm saying is Nimrod makes it a child's play whilst being incredibly quick and safe and fast and, dumb proof without requiring much skill. Existence of Nimrod just completely shuts down an entire class. Even the champions that were basically designed to counter the tech champion. Like the poor Magneto, he's looking in the face of this robot and gets absolutely riggedy wrecked. There's like one Bishop that's standing strong against Nimrod, but even Bishop is taking it on the chin from some newest mutant champions. And yeah, now because of Nimrod, we don't really have many or any Mutant Alliance War Defenders that are considered to be staples, unless you can make them in some sort of Nimrod-proof node. And the same thing, I think, we would probably see more mutant champions in battlegrounds if Nimrod didn't exist. But he does. And he's just a slaughterhouse. Besides ability to completely annihilate mutants, he's much better in a generic fight than most people give him credit for if you have him at SIG 200, and that is an important tip. Nimrod's SIG ability is much more potent than it initially appears because it increases the duration of these effects and potency, where total difference is massive. Because if your energized lasts 35% longer, means that you'll get more hits in whilst your energize is active, and also is 35% more potent, which means that getting in the same amount of hits would already get you at 35% more power, but with increased duration and the extra hits that you can gain, plus the increased potency, there is a massive, massive difference in between low SIG and SIG 200 Nimrod. And that cleared up. Obviously, there is kind of like a fairly specific or precise rotation that you want to use with Nimrod in a generic fight, which basically involves at the beginning you doing medium, parry, medium, medium, parry, medium, medium, parry, like medium, medium, and then timing your level 1 to activate both effects. energize and energy vulnerability without entering the eradicate protocol, and then building up to level 2, entering eradicate protocol, and launching your level 2 with energy vulnerability active is when you basically nuke down anybody in about 50 seconds or 40 some seconds. So Nimrod is much, much more powerful than a lot of people give him credit for in fights where regen and promise is not involved. We all know how powerful he is when those effects are involved, because pretty much everything melts in a single level 2. On top of it, obviously, he has a ton of tankiness in between his armor and damage mitigation from critical hits. His access to bleed and poison immunity. He's immune to armor breaks. Basically, armor breaks are 100% less potent. He deals energy damage instead of physical. He's immune to ability accuracy modification against mutant champions. And also, when opponents use special attacks, you either place power drain or cowardice on them. That's super helpful. Again, either makes him tankier or lets you be much more aggressive and gives him a form of power control. Then he has access to energize, giving him significantly more power, as well as access to unstoppable and massive shocks and regen. And that's basically a tank of Nimrod. Yeah, and on top of it all, he has plenty of defensive value as well, especially for when battlegrounds are concerned. So, as the rest of these champions that I mentioned here, he is extremely powerful in every single game mode, be that casual questing, be that alliance war, be that battlegrounds. He's staple battlegrounds champion, one of the best, if not the best, domino counters in the game. But again, as I said before, pretty much responsible for destroying an entire class. Moving on to spot number 5, and spot number 5 I am going to be giving to Dr. Doom. I kind of feel that a lot of people are temporarily moving away from Dr. Doom until something that reminds them how strong and powerful is Dr. Doom. Because Mystic class is a class where a lot of cool and fun things are happening right now, be that Absorbing Man, or be that hype of Juggernaut, or be that more people finally learning Tiger due to battlegrounds kind of forcing it on people in some way. And there's some other Diablo shenanigans and stuff like that. And it's always very fashionable not to pay attention to the one true Mystic King, which he absolutely is. Now, need I remind you, first and foremost, take a look at the man's stats. If these stats alone do not show a massive bias in creation of this champion, I do know what does. Because he does not only obviously have one of the highest prestiges in the game, he has one of the highest base attacks in the game. He has very healthy and big armor rating, large amount of block proficiency, crit resistance, and block penetration. And I don't think there's another champion with as many, green lights next to his stat window. So somebody was clearly very, very familiar and liked Dr. Doom very much when they were designing the guy. Now, when it comes to the abilities, again, Dr. Doom's abilities are perfectly designed to fit his comic counterpart because he is a villain. He loves giving opponents a ton of power, stealing it, using for himself, putting opponent in unescapable, death doom cycle, basically. And on top of it all, as he pushes your opponent through this doom cycle, he just gets progressively stronger with those special attacks, with those furies, and then cashes out with a massive level 2 to finish the fight. The man's an absolute machine, a monster, and he is extremely versatile, quite easy to use comparatively speaking with some of the other top champions, and always feels extremely, extremely safe because, your opponents will pretty much never crit against him unless there are guaranteed crits involved. Many of your abilities will work and protect and save you even if you are messing up, such as, the aura of Hazarath when you're eating a heavy attack to the face while it's active, or a special attack can significantly reduce the damage and obviously just let you shrug it off and carry on your way by being unstoppable for the last hit. And he has one of the best buff controls in the game, one of the best power control mechanics in the game, on top of, as before mentioned, extremely sturdy frame of base stats, and also immunity to armor break, immunity to armor shatter, immunity to shock, access to energy damage, access to incinerate, access to shocks, access to staggers and nullifies and power steals and furies. And yeah, Dr. Doom is just a special breed of stupidly strong. I don't think that there can be much discussion that when you look at Dr. Doom and virtually all other champions in the game. It's not necessarily his abilities that make him stand out as much as he does. It just is the feeling that he's kind of overtuned, like with his stats, plus a crazy good set of abilities. And that's quite straightforward. Him again, obviously a defensive powerhouse still, even though a lot of people have recently learned how to evade Dr. Doom's level 2. His tankiness still can provide significant problems in any game mode. You're never particularly happy to face Dr. Doom in a quest. You're never particularly happy to face Dr. Doom in Alliance War, because you know one small mistake can be a major problem. And obviously in Battlegrounds, even though Dr. Doom is by no means the fastest offensive champion in Battlegrounds, he has easily managed to stay extremely relevant and a staple, even in nuke metas, partially due to the fact that he is a dual-purpose champion, and partially due to the sheer amount of matchups that he takes. There are a ton of like less than standard fights where you can just bring in Doom and still do relatively well. Like Korg, for example, is a great example uh, because of his energy damage, and you can still put Korg in Doom cycle, and he still is a very solid Korg counter for it. And that is just one example. But yeah, Dr. Doom, I still value overall as the 5th best champion in the game. But moving on to spot number 4, and here we are going to discuss that second part of the Scorpion discussion, because it is Human Torch. And I have heard a lot of people saying that Scorpion is better than Human Torch, but no, he really isn't. And the first thing there is, a lot of people like to talk about Scorpion's immunities. Well, yeah, Scorpion does have overall, I'd say, more useful immunities, but people are pretending that Human Torch does not have his Cold Snap and Incinerate immunity. And Cold Snap immunity is definitely becoming more and more useful recently as well, in my opinion. And the fact that he does have it as well as Incinerate immunity definitely should not be disregarded. But then moving on to the fact that Scorpion has this all utility by access to Rapture, by access to Shock, by access to Poison, many different type of damage over time effects. You can play around opponents' immunities and stuff like that. But you just compare that with No Flame. Like, No Flame is, well, first and foremost, there's exactly one champion immune to No Flame in the game, and that champion is far from the scariest defender, which is Iceman. Then on top of it all, No Flames are passives, and passives are so much more powerful than any debuffs that champions can have, because you completely bypass all of the shrug of abilities, you completely bypass resistances from a ton of champions, especially because No Flame is its own thing and not Incinerate. There's nothing that's even like, properly dealing with him besides the Iceman, right? So you can use Human Torch against, again, Korg, against a whole bunch of skilled champions, because they will never shrug off his passive No Flames, for example, which is not something you can do with the vast majority of the champions. And then obviously you can carry on with the fact that Human Torch also has access to Power Sting effects, which is something that a lot of people forget, and those Power Stings are relatively potent and super useful. And then when you move forward, the realization that Human Torch is a nuke champion that has access to borderline infinite damage output. Because Human Torch is one of the fastest champions in short medium fights, in any matchup that he has, relatively decent access to energy damage, where he can build up his smolders. But even in matchups where he cannot build up his smolders, his damage output is very good, or at the very least, let's say above average. But then in any kind of like medium to longer level fight, Human Torch basically ramps up to infinite levels. And I used this argument before, but I do want to reiterate the fact that Human Torch is the type of champion that forces Kabam to design content around. An existence of Human Torch is definitely changing what piece of content you are receiving right now and will receive in future. Great example here, I'm sure that we will soon be made familiar with, was Abyss. At the time when we pretty much maxed out 5 stars and soloing Abyss fight was borderline impossible, you could bring in Human Torch and solo virtually all of his fights because of how strong he was. do you not think that when Abyss next version comes out, Kabam is going to make sure that there are significantly less fights that Human Torch can just absolutely brutally demolish? Well, they probably will. But all of those things put aside, Abyss or no Abyss, Human Torch is definitely a champion that is on a short list that Kabam basically proves the content for. And what Human Torch does not get done by other science champions, because stopping a science champion in its tracks at large is relatively an easy task. What do you do if you need to stop a science champion, with the possible exception of Red Hulk? Well, you give them debuff immunity or some really powerful cleanse abilities, and virtually none of the science class will do fuck all to any of them. And that doesn't work with Human Torch. While Human Torch has many of the more positive aspects of science class, Human Torch is quite unique in the sense that, yeah, he doesn't need to land buffs. He has his passives that nobody's immune to. So champions and nodes that will completely stomp in the face of Scorpion, Mr. Fantastic, everybody else, will do absolutely exactly fuck all to Human Torch. So all of those things considered, put together, Human Torch is the best science champion in the game, and in my opinion, 4th best champion overall in the game. Now, spot number 3, and spot number 3, I'm I'm still giving it to Kingpin, just like I did before. But this time around, I actually originally had him written in 2nd place. Kind of changed my mind last minute because I thought it could be just me. But I really wanted to put him in 2nd place. And again, there is no perfect way to describe why Kingpin is as powerful and as good as he is, because he doesn't look like it. Starting from his physical appearance, he's just a fat, bald guy. And then when you look at his abilities, nothing pops out there. There's no infinite damage ramp up. There's no, insanity happening there. He's kind of straightforward champion. He has reduced regeneration rate, but it cannot be modified, and that's due to the fact that he has debuffs on him constantly, which gives him basically an infinite healing with willpower. Kingpin gains rage, cool. You have 60% chance to purify any debuff when it's placed on him, but also whenever you reach 8 debuffs, all of them get purified. Then, cool, right? Incoming debuffs. Each debuff in Kingpin only strengthens his resolve, increasing his attack rating by 1.2k and his combat power rate slightly, so he does have somewhat increased combat power rate. And then when you get 8 debuffs, you gain Overpower, which is very potent Fury, basically. Makes your specials unblockable, so he does have access to unblockable specials, and you all know what Kingpin does, but none of it really screams, I'm OP. But he is. And wrap your head around that. And obviously it's just a mixture of just about the right abilities coming in the right place. The fact that he has increased combat power rate gives him, easier access to special attacks. His both special attacks are incredibly useful and powerful. One inflicting damage over time effect that also reduces attack and opponent's defensive ability accuracy with significant amount, should I say, in terms of damage and attack and ability accuracy reductions. Special 2 gives him basically long-lasting unstoppable buff, which also serves as a ramp up or further increase in damage for him. And yeah, the shrug of abilities are just crazy good. And end result is a champion that always seems to work and does so at the highest levels of the game. One of the best battleground champions, period. Can be an absolute menace on defense, but primarily is valued for his offense. One of the most popular Alliance World Champions, at times blacklisted, which means that he's like top 3 ban champ or top 2 ban champion of the season. And then one of the GOAT and staple questing champions. Kingpin just crushes every single game mode, and kind of both offensively and defensively. And he's not the fastest skill champion in game, let's face it, but he's quite fast. And then there are matchups when he gets debuffs placed on him, when then he turns in pretty much the fastest skill champion. But he's definitely kind of like the most versatile skill champion that I would say. Because you can do so much with just that level 1 alone, bypassing opponents' ability accuracies. You can easily stack 2 degens in most of the fights when opponent basically has 90% reduced attack and no defensive ability accuracy. With that, you can tank opponents' level 3s like nobody's business, if need be, and just plow through fights. Just works. It just works. Kingpin was in fact my very, very first rank 5 champion in the entire game, and I have zero regrets. That's how strong and powerful this guy is. And now let's move on to spot number 2, which I almost relegated to spot number 3, just so you know. And that is Kitty Pryde. And Kitty Pryde is present everywhere and is as popular as ever, is basically a staple battleground champion, one of the more popular rank 5 champion choices as well. We do see Kitty do insane stuff in questing, especially when synergized. We do see her doing crazy amount of work in Alliance Wars, staple Alliance War attacker, one of the more used champs as well. And obviously, yeah, Battlegrounds, primarily offensive. Now, initially when Kitty was released, actually many people, myself included, were quite worried about defensive potential of Kitty, but then, just can't realize that she's relatively squishy and it's not that hard to play around her. But looking at everything else, what makes Kitty is that phase mechanic, and the fact that you take no damage whilst phasing is by far the entire core of her kit. The rest of the abilities are obviously useful, like her immunity to incinerate, the way she gains prowess and increases the potency of her prowess, obviously works towards one of the most important goals, which is damage. But ultimately, it's all centered around the fact that she phases a lot and takes no damage whilst phasing, thus able to tank level 3s or deal with damage over time effects with it, find alternate openings due to her phase if need be, so on and so forth. And another champion that is not all that easy to use. It is something that you do need to get used to, and on a personal level, I have never really properly clicked with Kitty Pryde. I'm decent, but far from great using this champion because you do need to make a lot of decisions at a split second, and they have to be the right ones. Because here comes the downside of Kitty Pryde, is the fact that everything is going to be going perfect until it isn't, and then it typically tends to snowball very fast. For instance, if you lose your ramp up and you accidentally, run in the opponent, you lose your prowess, then that throws back your damage, it throws off your rhythm, and then you end up eating like a special attack to the face, and she's squishy, and then you just die. Like, there are several critical moments in the fight, for instance, right after you use a special attack, you lose all your prowesses, and you cannot phase, and you need to, like, be very, very conscious of that it is going to be, like, a dangerous moment in a fight. It's very easy to mess things up then. And she definitely is one of those champions in a similar manner to Ghost, where it looks perfect, it looks brilliant, you have full yellow bar, and you seem like you're going to be, skating through the entire fight till you make that one mistake, and then it can just snowball down. But all that being said, again, it's absolutely worth putting in effort. I need to put in more effort with Kitty as well. It definitely would be better for it. And without doubt, she's a champion that has a tremendous application of her, utility, due to the fact, how powerful is the fact that you take no damage. That is one of the most powerful abilities basically in the game, and such a frequent access to phasing as such. And obviously, it does help that a lot of other her abilities are quite in demand, like access to passive incinerates is quite cool and useful. Access to significant amounts of damage, incinerate immunity in itself, ability to generate large amount of prowess. All of those things do help her out, as well as relatively large critical rating, especially whilst you're phasing. Being, I think you're stun immune whilst you're phasing, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the stuff is very good, but yeah, it's all around the phasing mechanic and the fact that you take no damage whilst you're phasing. Right, so that is the second best champion in the game currently. So who is up top? Well, I mean, we all know who's up top. It's like the least guarded secret of the game. probably the most hated champion by Kabam right now, or what they would say the biggest mistake. Like, if Kabam could have their way, Hercules would be nerfed to the ground today. And you can kind of see why, because I'm sure that Hercules maybe made them some money short term by having people chase him. And I believe I put up my biggest arena score ever grinding for Hercules. But at the same time, long term, I'm sure that he's costing them an absolute fortune. The fact that you can just go in, not read nodes, smack through the game, and come out with like 0% health or 1% health, smiling with Hercules, not having any idea what fights you just did or what nodes did, it's ridiculous. Let's face it, Hercules is absolute MCOC porn filth. It's absolutely filth. It's a champion that most appeals to the laziest and worst instincts of summoner's nature. You hardly read any nodes with him. You hardly get bothered about playing well or dodging special attacks at times. You just go in and you smack the opponent, and that's it. When Incursion Zone 25 pushes appeared, when you could actually like buff up Hercules with your hacks, then it was even filthier because you could just unlock things with Hercules that's effectively immortal. And let's face it, Hercules has had a massive impact in the game, and not necessarily for the better. I praise champions like Absorbing Man, I praise champions like Tigra and a handful of others that genuinely make players better. Hercules is the opposite of that. Hercules makes players worse because you're just not trying, because you don't have to. Like, why would you learn how to dex that special or how those nodes work when you can just, lose all your health, go immortal, be unblockable, and smack champions? Now, especially with relics, when you can just like drop a level 2, drop like 2 combos, go into relic, drop another combo, go for another level 2. You can also quite easily stun lock a lot of things with Hercules, which makes it even more lazier and stupid. So, like, why is Hercules so special? It's like, we obviously know that everything in his kit is solid and good and strong, and yes, all that, His access to true focus, to bypass miss, awesome. And auto block as well. He has access to precision, so he starts critting like a Chad. And he has access to cruelty, so his numbers look much more impressive. And then he takes reduced damage from bleeds and poisons, so he's liquid courage double edge friendly. He's a ramp up champion that you can easily ramp in a single relatively short fight, but also carries through his ramp. That just shows how busted he is. He's a ramp up champion that still is considered a nuke. Imagine how bad champions like Hitmonkey or some shit must feel. It's like, Hitmonkey is like tiny healthful, let's say nothing too much going on for him except for the fact that, he's a nuke in battlegrounds now these days. And then there's Hercules that just does everything everywhere and is still considered a nuke. Oh, okay. So, rest of the abilities, they're cool, they're good. He gains his feats and he gains his little stun immunity, which is helpful and indestructible in level 3s. And all of that stuff is good, but nothing is broken. What is broken is his immortality and the fact that he's immortal the fact that he's unblockable whilst immortal, and the fact that you pause that immortality as you are attacking the opponent. And that combined with his ridiculous damage output just basically means that you can play the entire game in YOLO mode. And the best thing about it is, even if you screw up, just pop in a 20% revive, don't give a shit, and do whatever you wanted to do. I mean, it's a filthy champion. It really, really is. It's funny how stupid they made it. By far my favorite AQ champion. Precisely of all the laziness reasons explained, by the way, because AQ is a stupid game mode. But that put aside, obviously, we see Hercules in Alliance War, we see Hercules in Battlegrounds, and all that other stuff. He's actually surprisingly good defender as well, dude. He's infuriate. He messes up with so many champions. And immortality makes his stall as well. But yeah, the man's just mental. There's absolutely zero doubts in my mind that there are legitimate cases of depression or PTSD in Kabam's HQ because of Hercules. Imagine being a quest designer, working your ass off on like a hard quest for like 3 months, and then you put that quest in a game, and it turns out that 99% of the player base just Hercules half of it immediately. I'm talking about EOP. How stupid Kabam was that they allowed that champion exchange thing where you could bring in Hercules for every single challenge and then swap him out before second half. I mean, I am sure that somebody was incredibly salty, whoever was working on EOP. That has to be. And you're putting together all of these boss fights, like, haha, this is gonna be incredibly difficult. Little Johnny here is gonna have to spend 100 revives or something. Then little Johnny brings in Hercules, just nukes through the entire half of the quest and then swaps him out and still completes objective. I mean, it's Kabam's own fault. Well, first and foremost, they made Hercules. Second of all, they didn't Hercules prove Eternity of Pain. But I'm just saying, it's obvious that Hercules is a problem in the game. He's a stupid champion, and he's the best and strongest champion in the game right now. Anyways, I'll catch you guys later. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I still need to show you the new list so I can compare with the old list. Right, here we go. That was the new list. Here's the old list. Da-da-da-da. And yeah, so there's not too many changes. Top 6 is exactly the same. Then 7, 8, 9, and 10 will change slightly, but it's how this. As I said again, I do not expect too many changes in top 10 ever, or especially like top 5. I think if Kabam makes something as strong as Nimrod, Doctor Doom, Human Torch, Kingpin, Kitty Pryde, something like that, they'll just balance it out pretty much immediately. So we might, I I don't know what's gonna happen with the future of these videos. Well, at the very least, the very tippy top. I might just refer people to some older videos with that if nothing changes again, because I do think balancing program will pretty much prevent more champions like Kingpin and Hercules and Doctor Doom being a thing in the game. It's not necessarily an awful thing either, because the more great champions we have and the less insane champions we have, the game could be somewhat more balanced and allow for more variety, but we'll see. Anyways, this is the list. Hope you guys like it, and I will catch you guys tomorrow. Yeah. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about